This was a scam that made people pay because they believed arrest was minutes away. It was a debt collection scam that used fake authority, legal threats, and real fear to force immediate payment. The call came from what looked like a government number, sometimes showing police, tax agencies, or official departments. The voice on the line sounded controlled, direct, and certain, claiming unpaid debts, legal violations, or pending warrants. There was no time to think. The message was clear: pay now or face arrest, court action, or immediate consequences. Nothing in that moment felt optional. The pressure was designed to remove hesitation completely. The victim was instructed to stay on the call, not to contact anyone, and to follow payment steps exactly as directed. That was the point of no return, where fear replaced verification and decisions were made under controlled urgency. Money was sent through methods that could not be reversed, often within minutes of the call. And by the time the threat disappeared, the payment was gone, and the authority behind it never existed. By the early 2010s, as tax systems, debt records, and public services became more digitized across the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada, individuals grew accustomed to receiving official communication remotely. Government agencies and financial institutions increasingly used phone calls, automated systems, and letters to notify citizens about payments, fines, or unresolved obligations. That shift created a new layer of trust, where people began accepting authority through a voice on the phone without physical verification. The primary targets were not random. They were individuals more likely to comply under pressure, including elderly citizens, immigrants unfamiliar with local systems, and small business owners managing financial responsibilities. These groups often carried a higher perceived risk of legal consequences, making them more vulnerable to urgent claims of unpaid taxes or outstanding debts. The concept of immediate enforcement was already embedded in public understanding, where missing a payment could lead to penalties, court action, or in extreme cases, arrest. Scammers did not need to invent fear. They used existing systems and expectations to amplify it. At this stage, nothing had happened yet, but the environment was already conditioned for compliance. The trust in institutional authority, combined with limited real-time verification, created a structural weakness, and that weakness became the foundation on which the scam would build its entire operation. The call typically came without warning, often during working hours, using a number that appeared local or matched a known government or law enforcement agency. Caller ID spoofing made the source look legitimate, sometimes displaying names linked to tax authorities, police departments, or official institutions. The voice on the line was controlled, direct, and structured, often using scripted language that mimicked real enforcement communication. The message was immediate and specific, claiming unpaid taxes, unresolved debts, or legal violations tied to the victim's identity. Details were sometimes partially accurate, using publicly available information to reinforce credibility and reduce doubt. There was no casual conversation. The tone was authoritative and urgent, designed to establish control within the first few seconds. The victim was informed that a case had already been filed and that enforcement action was either underway or about to begin. Instructions followed quickly, often directing the victim to remain on the line and not disconnect under any circumstances. This isolation prevented external verification, keeping the victim within a controlled communication loop. And once the victim accepted the legitimacy of the call, the scam had successfully established authority over the situation. Once authority was established, the caller shifted from accusation to controlled instruction. outlining a process that appeared procedural and legally structured. The victim was told their case could be resolved immediately through payment, avoiding arrest, court proceedings, or escalating penalties. Specific amounts were provided, often calculated to feel precise, reinforcing the illusion of an official record tied to the individual. The caller used legal terminology, case numbers, badge identifiers, and department references to simulate institutional legitimacy. At the same time, the victim was kept engaged continuously, not given time to pause, question, or verify the claims independently. The payment methods were then introduced, typically requiring gift cards, wire transfers, or other irreversible channels presented as official settlement options. These methods were justified through explanations that sounded procedural, such as immediate processing, system limitations, or internal clearance requirements. The victim was instructed step by step, sometimes guided in real time through purchasing gift cards or initiating transfers while remaining on the call. At that moment, the decision shifted from verification to compliance, driven by urgency and perceived authority rather than factual confirmation. And once the payment process began, the scam had effectively converted fear into controlled financial extraction. Once the payment process began, the pressure intensified, with the caller reinforcing that any delay could trigger immediate arrest or escalation of legal action. The victim was reminded repeatedly that law enforcement could arrive at their location if the issue was not resolved within the defined time frame. Background elements were sometimes introduced, such as simulated office noise, secondary voices, or transfers to supposed supervisors to strengthen the illusion of a real enforcement environment. The caller maintained constant control of the conversation, preventing the victim from disconnecting or seeking external advice. Additional threats were layered in, including freezing of bank accounts, suspension of licenses, or legal penalties that would worsen the situation if payment was not completed. At this stage, the victim's focus narrowed entirely to avoiding the perceived consequence rather than verifying the legitimacy of the claim. The process was structured to feel urgent but manageable, giving the victim a clear path to resolve the issue immediately through payment. That created a psychological trap where compliance felt like the safest and fastest way to regain control. The victim followed instructions in real time, often completing multiple steps under continuous supervision from the caller. And once the transaction was finalized, the transaction crossed the point where reversal was no longer possible. The moment the payment was completed, the tone of the call often shifted, becoming shorter, less detailed, and eventually disconnected without clear closure. The victim, expecting confirmation or resolution, found that the communication either stopped immediately or continued briefly with vague assurances before ending. There was no official receipt, no case closure, and no follow-up from any real authority. Attempts to reconnect through the same number failed or led to different responses that no longer matched the original conversation. At that point, doubt replaced urgency, and the realization began to form that the authority behind the call might not have been real. Verification attempts with actual agencies confirmed that no case existed, no warrant had been issued, and no payment was required. The funds sent through gift cards, wire transfers, or other irreversible methods could not be recovered through standard processes. In many cases, the financial loss was immediate and total, with no institutional protection available for the type of transaction used. The impact extended beyond money, leaving victims with stress, fear, and in some cases, ongoing financial strain. And what had felt like a legal emergency resolved into a completed scam with no direct path to recovery. What began as isolated reports quickly scaled into a recognizable pattern, with thousands of complaints recorded across the United States between 2013 and 2018 during peak IRS impersonation waves. Victims across different regions described nearly identical call structures, the same threats of arrest, the same urgency, and the same demand for immediate payment. The method expanded beyond tax claims, adapting to utility bills, immigration cases, and loan collections, widening the target base without changing the core structure. Spoofed numbers continued to mirror legitimate agencies, making it difficult for individuals to distinguish real communication from fraudulent calls. Online forums, consumer protection sites, and official warnings began documenting these scams, gradually increasing public awareness. Financial regulators and law enforcement agencies started issuing alerts, emphasizing that real agencies would not demand payment through gift cards or immediate transfers. Despite these warnings, the scam persisted because it exploited real fear and operated faster than verification could occur. Patterns in payment methods and call scripts revealed a coordinated approach, suggesting organized operations rather than isolated actors. Early investigations identified clusters of activity linked to call centers operating outside the victim's country, often using layered communication systems. But even as awareness grew, the speed and psychological control of the scam allowed it to continue affecting new victims. As complaints escalated across multiple countries, coordinated investigations began linking these calls to organized fraud operations running from structured call centers, particularly identified in parts of India during mid to late 2010s crackdowns. Law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, IRS Criminal Investigation, and international partners, traced call patterns, VoIP systems, and payment flows connected to thousands of reported incidents. The operations followed a repeatable model: scripted calls, spoofed numbers, hierarchical call handling, and real-time supervision to maintain pressure on victims. Financial analysis showed that funds collected through gift cards, wire transfers, and later digital channels were quickly converted and distributed across networks to avoid traceability. Several large-scale raids were conducted, resulting in arrests of call center operators, supervisors, and individuals managing financial channels linked to the scam. In some cases, extraditions were pursued where cross-border evidence connected suspects to victims in other jurisdictions. Despite these actions, the core structure proved adaptable, with new operations emerging using modified scripts and updated technology. Authorities confirmed that the effectiveness of the scam came from exploiting trust in institutional authority, combined with immediate psychological pressure. Public campaigns were launched to educate citizens, emphasizing that real agencies do not threaten arrest over the phone or demand instant payment. What began as individual fear-driven payments was ultimately exposed as a global scam system built on impersonation, urgency, and controlled psychological manipulation.